my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Ryan Evans and I have been friends for a very, very long time. And when Ryan told me about a year ago that he was going to take this position, we made a pact that regardless of the issues that we may find ourselves debating, that we would remain friends. Ryan is president of Rooftop Solar Energy Association, a post he was named to last July. Prior to joining the association, Ryan worked for 13 years as an executive at the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce, and that's how we got acquainted. Ryan attended the University of Vermont, graduated with a bachelor's in psychology from the University of Utah. Go Utes. And an interesting fact about Ryan is that he was formerly the co-owner of the barbecue, or the Firehouse Barbecue Grill and Wasatch Smoking Company. This guy knows barbecue. It's my pleasure to introduce my boss and friend, Gary Hoogeveen. Gary was named Senior VP and Chief Commercial Officer of Rocky Mountain Power a little over 2 years ago. He was president and CEO of Kern River Gas Transmission Company for the previous 4 years. As many of you know, Rocky Mountain Power is part of the Berkshire Hathaway Energy family, as is Kern River. And before that, he had served as customer service and business development VP for Berkshire Hathaway Energy subsidiary, Northern Natural Gas Company. Gary is a space physicist. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Physics from the University of Northern Iowa and earned his PhD in space physics from Rice University. And a little known fact, well, not little known, something I love about Gary is he has a wicked sense of humor. So it's my pleasure to first have Gary come to the podium and describe what is going on in the world of net metering.
Thank you, Emily. I will try not to display the wicked part of the sense of humor, at least. But it's my pleasure to talk to you this afternoon with a good friend of mine as well on topic of net metering and rooftop solar. Just to get a sense of the room, if I may, just a show of hands, who either has rooftop solar on their roof or knows somebody that has rooftop solar? Yeah, I kind of thought so. It is a very big and growing industry, which we absolutely support at Rocky Mountain Power. But what I want to talk a little bit about, and I only have 7 to 10 minutes, so I'm going to get right to it, is it's really not about Rocky Mountain Power. It's really not about Ryan or his companies, the solar companies. It's really, from our perspective, it's about our customers. And what I want to talk just a little bit about is the impact that they see from rooftop solar and net metering on our customers who choose not to install rooftop solar and net metering. But first I want to just orient you with, if you would all maybe, if you have it in front of you, there's a little handout. It's a leave behind one page, front and back. If you have access to it, I'll point it out here as well. On the back page, but this is the back page. It indicates to you what Rocky Mountain Power's commitment to renewable energy is, and it is dramatic. We're very, very proud of that. We are the second largest utility owner of wind power in the country. And the first biggest is our sister company in Iowa, Mid-American Energy. So from the Berkshire Hathaway family, we're very, very committed to renewable energy. And rooftop solar is a part of that, as is hydroelectric. We have 41 hydroelectric plants. We have geothermal that we have here in the state, we've had it for more than 30 years. We connect to 3.3 million solar panels. That is, in addition to all the people that have rooftop solar, we have one panel for every person, family and child, in the state of Utah that we connect to and we can power from, and so on and so forth. The real point of what we do, though, isn't necessarily about providing this kind of electricity or that kind. It's about providing reliable electricity at low cost to our customers. When you come home and you flip the light on, the switch on, you expect the lights to come on. They do very high reliability, and that's what we absolutely care about. If they don't, talk to me and we'll come and we'll try to figure it out. But that really is that's our reason for being in business, is to provide you safe, reliable power at low cost. So what does that have to do with net metering and rooftop solar? If that is our mission, to provide safe, reliable, low-cost power, we need to make sure that everything we do is in line with that mission. And our net metering program, if you will, today, is something that we believe is currently out of whack with that low-cost providing power. And the reason for that is simple. And it can be complicated, but I can try to make it as simple as possible. We've done a study about the costs and benefits of what rooftop solar customers provide to the system. And our conclusion that we are currently going through in front of our commission is the public entity that sets our rates in the state. We've concluded that there's $400 a year on average that a rooftop solar customer is being paid by non-rooftop solar customers. So for all of you that have rooftop solar, you are currently receiving what we call a subsidy from those of you that don't have rooftop solar. And that's the simple piece that we don't think is fair. We are fine and we love solar, as I kind of pointed on that back. In fact, we receive about 8 times as much solar from large solar farms that are currently in Utah being built in central and southern Utah. We pay about 4 cents a kilowatt hour for that power. The current law for net metering for rooftop solar says that we have to pay 12 cents on average from the rooftop solar customer. So that's the inequity that we see. That's half of it. We can get the same solar energy for 4 cents where we pay 12 cents in net metering. The other thing is a little bit more complicated, but I can also try to make it simple. That when a customer installs rooftop solar, they continue to use our system. Obviously at night, they use the generation that we provide. That's obvious. But even during the day, something that's not necessarily known as well is that they are using the poles and wires and transmission system that we have about 23.99 hours of the day. It's only in the very instantaneous moments of the day when the use behind the meter equals what's being produced on the roof that they're not actually using our system. But as you can imagine, that doesn't happen very often, and it really doesn't. It's for about a microsecond, maybe once, twice, 3 times. If it's cloudy, it maybe comes in and out. But on average, again, about 23.99 hours of the day, they're using our system. But the way the current law is, we have to charge based on how many kilowatt hours they use on average in total throughout the day, excuse me, the month. So what happens is that they overproduce during the day. They don't use they use our system at night. But if we add up and for that month, they can actually not use anything on a net basis from the power company. So we will charge them essentially zero. There's a minimum bill of about $8, but essentially zero. But yet they've used the system 23.99 hours a day. That's the complicated piece that says, hey, they are using the system but not paying for it. When you take in both those ideas of getting 12 cents for their excess power versus getting it 4 cents in central and southern Utah for the same solar, and this issue of them using it 23.99 hours a day, that on average is a $400 a month subsidy. So what we're proposing in front of the commission is this net meter proposal that to fix essentially that rate design so that that $400 a month goes away. And the point being that when you choose to put rooftop solar on your roof, which we are happy for you to do, but when you do that, you should pay for your costs and not have your neighbors who choose not to. In many cases, obviously, people that aren't installing rooftop solar are people that don't have the funds to do it. They're many times the low income, and the more wealthy are those that put it on their roof. And what's happening now is this crazy subsidy from many times low income to higher income individuals. We don't think that's fair. That's what we're trying to correct through our proposal. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brian, and we'll take questions here after that.
Everything Gary says wrong. Just kidding. Unlike Gary, I'm gonna just use a quick little PowerPoint. But it's mostly to keep me on track. I just flew home from a vacation 2 days ago. I've got a little head cold. So this is my cheat sheet, if nothing else, to help me stay on track with all of you and not go too far as I talk. So thank you, first of all, for having us here today. This is an important discussion, not only for the solar industry and for Rocky Power, but for all of you, everyone in our state, as far as I'm concerned. Solar energy is a growing resource, not only in our state, but across the nation. I first want to say simply that, and I want to take a little step back. I don't want to get too far into the engineering world with a rocket scientist. Gary's a physicist, and we'll stay out of the engineering world. But realistically, I want to take an opportunity just to talk about the industry first. What's happening in the solar industry? Why is this becoming a big deal? What's motivating customers? And then kind of get into maybe why we think this is an important discussion, not just for our businesses and for those employed in it, but for the state in general. But we really do have the opportunity in Utah to be a leader in solar energy, and we are proving ourselves as a state to be a leader in the solar energy industry and across the nation as far as energy production. We have great energy resources already in terms of wind, natural gas, and coal, oil. Energy is rich in this state, and solar has that great potential. We are the 5th sunniest state in the nation. We have lots of wide open, highly elevated land down in central and southern Utah. As well as just being the 5th sunniest state, we've got lots of homes. I just read a report this morning off of Google that 90% of the homes in Utah actually have a decent utilization possibility for rooftop solar, whereas the national average is only 60%. So again, being a sunny state really positions us well for an energy source that is becoming more and more affordable for our nation. Just to the industry at a glance, I think this is just important to see. We are 6th nationally in terms of total installed solar in the nation. Over the last 2 years, there's been about $640 million in capital investment made into the state. There's now 4,400 jobs in the state in the solar industry, 1,700 of which were created in 2016 alone. That was a 65% increase the year over year. And I had 13,000, but it is more like 16,000 rooftop solar installations. I haven't updated that slide, but I apologize for that. So it's growing. It's got impact, and that was the industry as a whole. As far as the actual rooftop solar, so that's where we're having the net metering conversation between both residential and commercial. 2016 alone was about $350 million in economic benefits to the state of Utah. 12 to 15 million in sales tax was generated for the state. Both personal income taxes from those 4,400 jobs as well as corporate income taxes are being generated for the state. And as well, the bulk of that 4,400 jobs is within the rooftop solar industry. What are some of the factors for growth? So first, the consumer motivations. Why are people going solar? We did a recent poll of about 500 customers over the last 2 years. 89% simply wanted to save money. They saw it as an opportunity to decrease their utility bill and to have a little more predictability in their household budgets. 76% also said that energy independence and emergency preparedness were important to them. The ability to be able to use solar at a time of need if they've got the right inverters and that technology is all coming online. And then lastly, 76%, which you'd think that would be a little bit higher number, did it for the environmental benefit, for reducing their own carbon footprint, for being a community and socially minded person. But they felt that was important. And then in a broader public poll, we found that 88% of people just find that solar is an important asset for our state in the future as we grow. The most significant reason we've seen such an uptick in solar is simply because the price has dropped. The cost of installed solar has dropped 66% over the last 10 years, 12% last year alone. We do see that flattening out, so we don't think it's going to go too much further. It's not going to drop another 12% in 2017. However, that is a very significant reason. And then what's the value of solar? Gary talked a little bit about some of their challenges where they see some inequities. We see the different opportunity in terms of looking at what are the benefits that solar brings. So rooftop solar, what does it do in terms of the efficient delivery of energy? It's a distributed resource of energy, meaning it's produced and used at the home. That has a value to it. And we can get into nitty-gritties and details, but there's a lot of values that various states and public utility commissions will find along with solar. And our desire is simply to look at what is truly the benefits and the costs of the rooftop solar customer. We do not want them to be receiving a subsidy. In our mind, we don't necessarily know that they are receiving a subsidy. Someone used an analogy for me not too long ago, and it's a real simple analogy. But someone selling their home sets the price. They know what's in that home. They put on the market. You as a buyer go in, you work with your realtor, your expert, and you go in and you look at, you look at the numbers that they provide you, the data they provide you. That's what we're going through right now. We're looking at the data that Rocky Mountain Power has put forward because it's a lot and it's significant. It's important to actually really weigh what information they have versus to say, okay, what do we as an industry, what can we show that maybe that's not quite accurate? So maybe that $400 subsidy isn't quite right. Let's just make sure we get that right. And that's why we have a regulatory body in the Public Service Commission, the opportunity to actually get that right and look at those numbers. I don't really want you to look at this too much except to say that the 18 graphs, this was just a nice PDF that I want to throw on a slide. It just represents something. Something is that over the last couple of years, we've seen at least 18 different public service commissions or utility commissions look at the value of solar. What is it worth in their communities in terms of net metering? And 13 out of 18 found that to be at retail value or more. When you subtract environmental benefits, which our Public Service Commission will not consider, into the mix, you actually end up with still 10 out of 18 states ended up there. And so that doesn't, some said it much lower than that. Our opportunity is simply having this discussion of saying, let's make sure we get it right. Other considerations, and this goes beyond Rocky Mountain Power in this case, but I think it's important for you all to consider because I think it's important for our state. But there are considerations for Rooftop, and maybe this comes outside of the Public Service Commissions. Gary and I have talked about this. Is there something done at a state level because of some of these externalities that solar does bring along with it? So not all of it necessarily has to be included in the Public Service Commission process. There may be other opportunities to recognize the value outside of that process. Some of those are the environmental impact of solar. Clearly having one home with rooftop solar, maybe not the best environmental air quality benefit. Having 16,000 homes, okay, we're starting to collect some collective impact. But look down the road too. How do we set ourselves up in the future? So those with solar, are they more likely to have an electric vehicle? In 3 to 5 years, I think we already are seeing that batteries, so energy storage prices are coming down. In 3 to 5 years, do we have a lot more batteries that are paired with a solar installation or purchased down the road? And at that point, you're generating electricity, you're storing it, you're filling your electric vehicle off it. And in my mind, there's no doubt you're significantly improving your carbon footprint at that point. So there's some environmental benefits. And in Utah, where we have air quality problems, we kind of have to consider all the above. It doesn't mean this is the answer. There is no answer for air quality, but it doesn't hurt to make sure that we are lining ourselves up the right way. Also, the economic impact, as I said, the 65% improvement last year it's the fastest growing industry in the state of Utah. Generally, they are higher paid positions. Typically, you look at major corporations like IKEA, Overstock.com, eBay, had Facebook come here. It was important to them. But they want to have access to renewable energy. It may not always be solar. It may not always be rooftop solar. But they look at that when they're considering where they want to place their company. And then also, we're very fortunate right now to have 2 corporate headquarters here. We don't have a lot of corporate headquarters in the state of Utah as far as national headquarters. Vivint Solar has their national headquarters here. Solar City also has a regional headquarters here. The combined, about a year and a half ago, worked with the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and should all things stay favorable as far as a solar business environment here, they expect to create 7,000 jobs in 10 years. So those are significant things. And again, this doesn't necessarily mean that's part of the Public Service Commission, but it's things that we ought to be considering when we talk about this issue. And then why does it matter? And fortunately, we're probably not in the exact same situation as Nevada. Nevada is just the most talked about state. They implemented some similar rates, and they had significant job loss in that state. They had ratepayer unrest. There were consumer, I guess, lawsuits that came about. The governor got involved. The legislature got involved. There was a ballot initiative. And fortunately, Rocky Mountain Power had the foresight to say, unlike Nevada, we actually really feel that grandfathering is something important, recognizing the value at which people bought into net metering in their solar systems to begin with. And so we agree. We think that's an important principle because we always feel like in the energy world, at least I do as far as solar goes, when you get into it, you may expect that your rates may fluctuate a little bit. Yours do as consumers of electricity, and that would happen the same thing for solar. But to dramatically change the game where you're receiving it on one hand and then playing out a different ball field altogether, that grandfathering principle is very important to us, at least. And so we appreciate that Rocky Mountain Power saw that as a significant part of the conversation. But we do have these jobs that are being created now. We're a fast-growing state. We need jobs. And so let's just make sure we get it right. And then lastly, what do we want as an industry? And I think all we want is a settlement that keeps the solar industry moving forward. I think that it's important for us that ratepayers are not, the non-solar ratepayers are not subsidizing solar customers. But we are a state of unprecedented partnerships. And as Rotarians, I'm sure you've heard that phrase a million times at these luncheons. Certain political figures may say that every once in a while. And I think we can do that here. I think we have the opportunity to say, okay, how can we do this a little bit better? How can we do it a little bit different? And fortunately, we do have meetings with Rocky Mountain Power and other stakeholders on a regular basis. The governor is supportive of a collaborative process of trying to find answers. And we are looking forward to seeing what may come from that. But ultimately, we want this to be market-driven. We recognize the high demand of consumers in the state that want to go solar, and we'd like to make sure that we can at least provide that for them and for the rest of you that maybe may or not choose solar. So thank you very much.
Well, this is interesting. We've had a lot of questions, and I'm going to go through them. And I'd like, some of them I think speaker read more than the other, but you're each feel free to comment. If solar is such a wonderful resource, and it is, why should there be a subsidy of any kind? Why shouldn't it just stand on its own economically?
Ryan, I think that's probably yours. And I think that's what we're trying to determine. I personally would love to see that we don't have a subsidy, but the state up until now, or still up until now, has had a retail net metering policy. We are in the process of determining what that value is. We actually just worked with the legislature to phase the solar tax credit out. So every time that a homeowner put solar on their homes, they were eligible for up to $2,000 in tax credits. We just worked with legislators to phase that out in a gradual process, recognizing that the cost of solar installed has come down. We don't need that subsidy as much as we used to as an industry to promote a good thing for our state. So our goal is to say we are not subsidized in any way. So that's simply the process that we're going through right now.
Thank you. This is probably for you. Why doesn't the $8 per month minimum charge cover this?
Yeah, good question. And to answer that fully, I'd have to get into all the details, which I'm not prepared to do. But I can tell you that the fixed charges, if you just look at how do we charge you, it's kind of our, for what services? It's services from our generators to the transmission lines, to the distribution lines, which are kind of poles and wires in your neighborhood. The $8 isn't sufficient to pay for that grid, just that distribution piece in your neighborhoods that connect to the transmission and the generation that you are not using and appropriately not having to pay for. So our calculation is that somewhere between $25 to $30 a month on average is sufficient, is what it would take to pay for the poles and wires in the distribution system. So the $8 is just not enough to pay for the cost.
Thank you. Now this is from someone who net metered in 2009 and thought it was expensive, but was helped by Rocky Mountain Power under a 20-year payback. And at that time it was projected to be less expensive than building, to encourage that than building new power plants. Has anything changed? Are the economics the same today as they were in 2009?
Great question. The quick answer is it keeps getting cheaper and cheaper to provide electricity in the industry. Solar is a great example. Like I say, we can get solar, a new solar power plant in a large plant, get electricity from that in central and southern Utah for 4 cents. Whereas, as Ryan was pointing out, perhaps 7, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, a solar plant was probably had to have 11 cents, 11 to 12 cents on a large scale. So the rest of that story is also that as utilities have evolved as much, and so our population continues to grow, but we are also very committed to reducing energy usage per customer through our demand-side management and energy efficiency programs, which is tremendous for our customers as it saves money, exactly what you were referring to, which is we don't have to build power plants in the future because we've stopped your energy growth. As working together with you. LED light bulbs is a perfect example. That has reduced energy usage by 30%. When you install an LED light bulbs throughout your home, on average, you're gonna save about 30% on your bill. And if everybody does that, which we're encouraging them, we actually pay you to do that. That reduces our need to build that next power plant. Today, we forecast we don't need to build another power plant, coal, gas, anything, until after 2030. So that has changed, and that's changed fairly dramatically in the last decade, because primarily for these energy efficiency issues.
If I could just, for one quick follow-up on that, it's pretty actually impressive to start to see how low the cost of installed solar has become on the utility scale level, especially at 4 cents, as Carrie was saying. Across the world, you see it even cheaper. In various parts of the world, you see that cheaper. And large-scale utility scale solar is now on par with a lot of natural gas plants, coal plants, getting cheaper than coal plants. But the only challenge still with solar will be that it only shines during the day. So it's not a all-day, everyday source of energy, but it is very inexpensive to generate. And then simply there's, for 4 cents, it sounds really good, but there are costs to get that energy from where it was produced up to your home, and you don't own it at that point. So there is a little discrepancy between whether it's your solar, everybody's solar. I personally am a big fan of solar. I think solar energy across all spectrums is a good thing for us to be considering.
Thank you. Now here's what Rotarian that wants to go rogue on us. How can a solar panel user get off the grid? Are they allowed to? I guess.
Yes, you are allowed to go off the grid. Absolutely. You certainly cannot and would not prevent you from doing it. We participated in a study, and again, if I had the details, this could be an hour-long discussion in itself. To truly go off the grid, the study that we participated in, the quick answer is that it costs between $130,000 and $1 million to do it for an average home. I disregard the $1 million estimate, but the $130,000, that was the equivalent of putting 10 Tesla Powerwalls, if you're familiar with the Tesla Powerwall, to actually cut the wire and continue to have the reliability that you enjoy with the utility. And therein lies the kind of question. Are you okay with your power going out 3, 4, 5 hours a day? If so, it's going to cost you less. You don't have to put in all those batteries. But if you really want to have that kind of reliability throughout the year, and particularly during the winter when your array isn't producing, and in the summer it's overproducing by 2 to 3 times, that's all got to go into charge batteries. You have to have the battery capacity to do it. So if you really look at the study, and it was by an industry representative called CSLR, and I apologize, I don't remember what that stands for, but if you look it up, there was a paper in Hong Kong presented by CSLR that explains all that.
And I would just simply agree with what Gary said and say that we don't see very many people that do go off-grid. Typically, the only off-grid people that I am aware of are those that have a cabin somewhere or a farm in a remote area and simply running a transmission line to feed their power in a traditional, or feed their energy needs in a traditional sense would not be economical for them. So they go for solar and battery storage. And even as I talked about the option of greater increase in battery storage in the coming years, which I do think is a realistic possibility, I still don't think it will be at the point that people go off grid. And we don't expect that. It simply is a point of helping to shave the peak, maybe to be able to charge your cars, use more of the energy that you actually produce on your home versus even having to sell it back to the utility. So that's how I see it, not necessarily going in terms of the way off grid.
I totally agree with that. And there's the battery technology will become very important in the industry. It will be at the utility scale as well as at home. To go completely off the problems we just talked about, but I want to bring up one other issue that I think is fascinating, and I don't want to take up too much time, but there will be a time in the not too distant future, because of the low cost solar, that we will have a flood of energy, of electricity available to us during the middle of the day. But today, we all use most of the power, our peak power as we call it, the peak usage, the peak need is in the afternoon and late, early evening. So we're talking about 5 to 7 p.m. The sun's coming down, obviously, that's where batteries will become very important. And so stay tuned to that issue.
Here's a question, I assume from someone who has an electric car. Can you get 220 volt power from solar cells?
I don't know. Well, I know lots of people that do charge their cars during the day when their power is produced. So yes, I would imagine so, because it's just a matter of how much you produce. But maybe I'm wrong. Gary, do you know something I don't know?
Honestly, I don't know.
Have states such as California experienced oversupply from rooftop solar? And if so, what regulatory or policy mechanisms should be put in place to avoid a similar problem in Utah?
So again, that's kind of that point I was just making. The oversupply during the middle of the day is a very interesting issue to stay tuned to. There's something called the duck curve, and if I had a picture of it like Brian had PowerPoint, I could show you, but it's kind of this belly and the back of the duck that you're going to have a whole lot of power available to you in the middle of the day, and then it plummets as the sun comes down, and all the usage is then saying, I need some sort of power up into that 5 to 7 p.m. So that's the neck of the duck. That back and the belly and the duck neck is what is going to be really needed for, again, either gas-fired power plants or batteries. And the issue is that power is going to be extremely cheap during the middle of the day and extremely expensive for those 2-3 hours. It may be zero cost during the middle of the day and $1,000 a megawatt hour, $100 a kilowatt hour, $10 a kilowatt hour. It could be really expensive. The point being, stay tuned to that issue, because that is one that the utilities are going to have to figure out. And I think working with the solar companies in particular is going to be very helpful.
Yeah, we've seen California, Hawaii is actually the shining example of more saturation of the market. Typically what a lot of states and regulatory bodies will look at is when you get to a 5% saturation of the market for rooftop solar, that's where you should have made a change, or you will have to make a change if not already. We're at 2% now, so it's very relevant to be looking at this as we go forward, since we are increasing at a faster and faster level at this point. So
We just hit 3%.
we hit 3.
It's growing dramatically.
We just hit 3. Everybody's be happy.
What is the next step before the Public Service Commission with Rocky Mountain's proposal? And also, did the Utah legislature take any action this session on solar?
The next step is continuing the process that was started in front of the commission 2 years ago. And Ryan and his companies and his organization are very involved in that. Ryan mentioned we are in settlement negotiations. We are talking with all the relevant parties, and the governor's office has been involved. The schedule right now is for an August hearing by the Public Service Commission on our proposal on our new net metering rates. So there'll be a process between now and August to prepare and provide testimony and counter testimony. And then we'll go in front of the commission in the hearings in August. We would expect a ruling in September, unless there's a settlement prior to that with all parties, in which case that would stop.
And no, the legislature did not have any net metering bills, and that was not necessarily that we actually had anything discussed, formally with Rocky Mountain Power. But I think both sides said, let's not run anything legislatively. Let's work it out in the good faith process that we have as far as our settlement conversations go. And that felt like the better way. If we can work it out with real numbers, with both sides, and I shouldn't say both sides, there's many parties that sit at this table, from consumer advocates to the Division of Public Utilities. Let's just make sure that all of us are happy. And if we can do it on our own, that's the better way to handle this.
Ryan, it's a little off the subject of net metering, but would you mention briefly what the legislature did relative to the homeowners associations and rooftop solar restrictions?
Sure, thank you, Mike. We did pass one bill proactively this year from the solar industry, and that was a solar access bill. It was aimed at HOAs, homeowners associations. What we found was a lot of people who wanted to go solar were arbitrarily being denied by their HOA. There were some HOAs that went about it in a very legitimate process. Some, though, would just simply say, we've got 2 or 3, we don't want any more. Or we're going to impose this restriction, and this restriction, and this restriction, and they would make it very uneconomical for their residents to do so. So we worked with Senator Fillmore to push forward legislation, And honestly, it was a well-crafted bill in the sense that it was negotiated between many different parties. And we got to a place where I think it's a very good bill. It simply says, if your homeowners association expressly prohibits solar panels or whatever those restrictions are, then they exist. You have to get a 2/3 majority to overturn that. However, if they don't and you want to restrict solar, you have to get a 2/3 majority of your residents. And that's sort of the easy of the bill, but basically saying if you don't have it, you have to be able to allow your citizens, your association members to get it. If you don't want it, you simply have to pass it by 2/3 to say no solar in our community.
I think Gary touched on this, but the question is, what % of power is carbon-based generation in Utah, and what is Rocky Mountain's plan for the future? I think you still covered this a little bit.
Yeah, I can say more. I'm happy to. Our plan is to decarbonize in an intelligent way without raising costs to our customers. And it gets back to our mission on delivering safe, reliable, low-cost plus energy. Currently, we're just over half coal, about 25% natural gas, and then the remainder non-carbon based. And we are growing that non-carbon based rather significantly. So the plan for each coal plant, I could go through kind of a plan, and what we see is kind of getting to its end of life. Some of that might be accelerated, might not be. Again, it would only be accelerated to the extent we don't have to have our customers pay for that extra cost to accelerate its closure. And again, we have to be very cognizant of the coal industry in our state. Many people don't like to recognize it, but there are a lot of jobs associated with coal, thousands of jobs. And there are towns in Utah and Wyoming and other places where we have power plants that will disappear when the power plant closes, and it will close, and we know that. But it has to be done in a rational, measured pace, one that can be planned for and doesn't impact these communities.
This question relates to solar and the carbon footprint. Is there a carbon footprint associated with solar?
There is at the production source. So where panels are produced, that's where you would see your carbon footprint. What that is offhand, I do not know. But where you have it on your home, there is not. At that point, it's a very environmentally friendly form of energy.
I would comment, and I don't disagree with what you said, in addition, because, and this is also kind of a nuanced issue, and I won't make a big deal out of it, but when you use rooftop solar or any solar power, again, it's all in the middle of the day. You still have energy needs at night. What's providing that? It's still coal power for the most part. The more wind we can build, the more wind actually blows at night as well. So we're trying to build more wind and provide that as kind of an off-peak resource. But just as a total energy user, you still have that carbon base typically at night.
Question relates to economics in California, where electricity is so expensive compared to electricity in Utah, the current state. Why does solar make a good investment sense?
Simply put, sorry.
I said it correctly.
No, I think
electricity is so much cheaper in Utah now.
Yeah.
Why is solar a good deal, whereas in California where it's expensive?
Yeah, it's less of a good deal when the rates are low in your alternative. So if the utility rates are low, and ours are low, we're in the lower decile, lower 10% of the entire country, it's hard then to justify putting rooftop solar on, and we recognize that. It is kind of what it is. And again, we try to keep your rates very low. And our intent would be to keep it so low that, and again, we want to decarbonize. We will be building these solar and wind plants and getting to that goal. If you do want to put it on your roof, again, you're going to have to kind of compare the economics. And I'm not going to apologize for keeping your rates low.
And I would thank Rocky Mountain Power for keeping our rates low as an economic engine, economic driver for decades now. That's been an important part of our economy. So clearly that is something that we recognize. It does make it harder to compete in the state of Utah. It's not as easy as California. It's not as easy as certain other communities that have very high electricity costs. However, it still does pan out now currently, and our hope is that it still will in the future.
This gets to the net metering proposal. Has there been any thought to charging everyone the same connection fee, solar or otherwise, and just charge for use, separately for use?
Yes, and that would be the desire. If we could get to what we call straight fixed variable pricing, that is kind of the utility holy grail. Your fixed costs are those, and for those that have business, you know what this is typically, but your fixed costs are those that if you don't have any usage, you still have to pay them. Poles and wires, all the investments we've made to deliver electricity, those are fixed costs. The fuel we burn in our natural gas power plant is a variable cost, because if we don't have to run it, we don't have to buy that fuel. That's the ideal way to charge customers, send them the signal that says, hey, if you reduce your usage, you can avoid these variable costs, but these fixed costs we all still need.
Certainly with fixed costs, it makes it much easier to see where utilization is and whatnot. The question is, what is that fixed cost? The challenge is we've got people now that are low-income populations that it doesn't, regardless of solar, there's reasons why we don't have that currently in place as far as rate structure goes. That gets really wonky, and I sat through an hour session on rate making this morning, and it blew my mind a little bit. But truly, there's a lot that goes into that. There are a lot of considerations, so it's not something we have now for lots of reasons.
How do net metering laws vary from state to state and compare current Utah law and Rocky Mountain's proposal to neighboring states, for example?
Yeah, another good question. They range dramatically, and it kind of serves to kind of orient, even in Utah. In 2002, we started net metering, and it was done as a way to encourage people to put rooftop solar on. We believe the industry has now gotten to a place with the doubling of growth every year that they can, and they do, stand alone without the subsidization. Different states look at this differently. We believe that our proposal is, again, very reflective of what we call cost causation. The costs are charged to those that cause the cost. The rates are charged to those that cause the cost. In different states, they do it differently. For example, there's a demand charge in our proposal that many in the solar industry don't like. It is reflective of the fixed costs, and the more you peak usage in a month, you get charged for that peak. So if you max out at 10 kilowatts, you'll be charged for 10 kilowatts, even if the rest of the time you don't use it. But that's the cost that you cause on the system, because we have to build to meet your highest usage. So we think that's fair. There are other states that take different looks, but I believe that is a fair way to do it.
And Gary's absolutely right. It does run all over the place as far as net metering policies, rooftop solar policies. Some give it very little value, but others give it tremendous value. There's certain states that are upwards of 18 to 24 cents. And they take into a lot of other factors that maybe we as a state don't. I mentioned earlier that our state actually passed legislation where environmental benefits are not to be considered necessarily. In other states, they do take those environmental benefits into account, and therefore their rate, their retail rate, or their net metering rate is much higher. And yes, we don't like demand charges for lots of reasons on the solar industry side. And that gets into a lot of deep conversation, but there's very few, if any, regulated public utilities that have a mandatory demand charge in place now. And a lot of that's it would be a burden on many residential customers to try to manage that one-time use of potential higher energy usage during a certain time frame. Picture a 16-year-old that comes home and throws their baseball uniform in the dryer, and maybe it spikes it, or you've got a contractor at your house one day that spikes your energy use, and you have to pay for that for the rest of the month. So there's some challenges for us on that, but that's part of the reason why we're in settlement discussions and negotiations, just trying to figure out what can work for all of us.
One last quick question, and what do you feel are the major, obstacles to encouraging wind and solar among the customer base? Why are people in the United States not in favor of it? And what are the biggest hurdles to overcome?
Can we take that one first?
Yeah.
I think first and foremost, I think actually there's a great feeling across the nation, whether it's Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Independent, that solar is really good. people really like solar. They see the potential of solar. They may not always like the pricing structure of solar. They may have market principles that they feel that aren't aligned in the way that it's subsidized, but there's subsidies in every energy form. And so it's just a matter of looking at, what works. But I think the biggest barrier simply is price. So even though prices have dropped 66% since 2010, as I mentioned earlier, it's still a very costly venture for a homeowner to put it on their roof. We're talking about a $20,000 to $40,000 expenditure. And that's a huge investment on the part of a homeowner. So it doesn't work for everybody. So that's probably number one, is just not everybody can afford to or wants to afford to at that price.
Yeah. First of all, these are brilliant questions. Congratulations. Thank you for giving us these questions. We can talk about this. Ryan and I could be here for 2 hours, and you guys would all be asleep. You realize that. But your questions get right to the heart of the matter. And this is a great one to end on, because in my opinion, I think solar will become a very, very large and significant part of our resource base in this country. The question is, how do you do that most efficiently, most effectively, at lowest cost? And there is a part for distributed energy resources, because it does help avoid transmission costs and some of the distribution costs, and therefore it has a higher value. We do reflect that in our cost of service. But as I was kind of pointing out earlier, I can get 4 cents in these large solar farms versus having to pay more for solar rooftop. So the question is, how do we as a society, and we as an industry really, want to most effectively adopt renewables? And wind plays a huge part. Solar is going to play a bigger and bigger part because it is so cheap to do, and it's fantastic. Batteries are going to have to play a part. But the utility, our industry, my industry, we've got to figure out how to do that in the most efficient way for you as customers, so that you can benefit from the decarbonization and you can keep your rates low. And heck, they ought to be lower than they are now. And that's where we're headed. So again, thank you for all your questions, and thank you, Ryan.
Thank you very much.
Again, I want to thank Gary, Ryan, Mike, thank you for moderating. Wayne, thank you for the introductions. As you know, we weekly donate a book to the Franklin Elementary School Library. This one is Mysterious Patterns, Finding Fractals in Nature. And Gary knew what fractals were.